because he doesn't want to f around with the United States.
4:12 a.m. The Southern Caribbean was silent, dark, and unnervingly calm when the first anomaly flickered across the radar screen of a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon. The operator stared at a single, stubborn blip. No identification signal, no navigation lights, and no radio reply. It cut through the fog darkness at 22 knots, steady as a metronome, moving straight toward restricted waters. The crew activated the AN/APY-10 radar and the MX-20 HD infrared camera to build a composite image. The thermal feed painted a harsh outline, a narrow hull running hot, engines pushed beyond limit, and on the deck, rows of metallic drums wrapped tight and sealed. It wasn't a fishing boat, it was a logistics vessel, modified for speed and silence. The data told a story no one needed to guess at. This was a cartel ship, built to outrun patrols and disappear between storms. From the Poseidon's mission console, a coded order went out over the encrypted network. Track continuous. Prepare for interdiction. That command rippled across the tactical grid and reached a U.S. Marine Corps assault ship 120 nautical miles away. Within minutes, deck lights flared to life. Ground crews rolled an AH-1Z Viper out of the hangar, blades folded tight under the rain. Technicians loaded 2 AGM-114L Hellfire missiles and checked the 20mm M197 cannon slung beneath its chin. The engines roared awake. 2 General Electric T-700GE-401CS spooling up into a scream that drowned out the ocean. The Viper lifted from the deck like a shadow with teeth. At 200 feet above the water, its red strobes reflected off the surface like sparks skimming steel. Inside the cockpit, the pilot's helmet display lit with live data from the Poseidon, bearing, wind vector, target range, and infrared trace. The aircraft skimmed low, hugging the radar horizon, using the storm edge to mask its approach. This was no patrol, no warning shots. The mission parameters were clear. Identify, pursue, neutralize. Somewhere ahead, that ghost on the water carried enough chemical precursors to poison a continent. And yet, a question hung in the air between thunder and rotor noise. What kind of operation could possibly justify deploying a marine attack helicopter against a single smuggler's craft? If you're watching from the United States or anywhere around the world, make sure to like and subscribe to Military Power, because the answer to that question begins in the storm ahead. Because the blip on the Poseidon's radar was not a fishing vessel, but a hardened logistics platform, its hull rebuilt for endurance, its stern reinforced, and its deck stacked with sealed metallic drums. The launch of a Marine Corps AH-1Z Viper was not an overreaction. It was a calculated necessity. The Poseidon's data feed told the truth, line by line, stripped of speculation. Infrared scans revealed overworked engines burning far hotter than civilian thresholds. The deck profile, mapped by synthetic aperture radar, showed symmetrical cargo layout with metal shielding, impossible for fishing gear. Chemical tanks insulated against salt corrosion completed the picture. Whatever moved across that dark stretch of sea was engineered to survive storms and scrutiny alike. The tactical assessment left no room for hesitation. Interception was mandatory. Within minutes, the coordinates were locked, and the Viper was airborne, its twin General Electric turbines spooling up into a scream that carved through the night air. At roughly 4:18 a.m., the helicopter entered the storm's outer edge. Rain began as a whisper against the canopy, then hardened into metallic percussion. Each droplet streaked into a brief flash across the pilot's heads-up display. The Poseidon's radar feed updated every 2 seconds, marking range, velocity, and bearing. 145 degrees, closing speed 22 knots, distance 12 nautical miles, and shrinking. The Viper maintained a steady flight profile at 150 knots, skimming 200 feet above the water, low enough to hide beneath radar clutter, but high enough to keep its rotors clear of spray. The sky around them was a sheet of gray, sliced by lightning that illuminated the horizon in short, electric bursts. The sea below was a heaving mirror, oil slick, dark, and restless. Inside the cockpit, the illumination from digital panels washed the crew in cold green light. Fingers moved over switches with unbroken rhythm. Armament systems online, flare dispensers primed, targeting sensors stabilized. Every action was procedural, rehearsed to the second, the human element syncing seamlessly with machine precision. From above, the Poseidon continued to track. Its operators patched real-time telemetry to the Viper's data link, integrating radar, electro-optical imagery, and magnetic anomaly detection into a single, shared, tactical picture. In the Combat Information Center, analysts watched the small white blip move across the map, understanding the risk. If that ship breached the maritime control zone, it could disappear under jurisdictional cover. Through the storm's shifting curtains, the target emerged, barely visible. A dim hull, cutting a narrow path through waves that crashed against its bow. Its navigation lights were dead, and its radio silence complete. The Viper's targeting sensors captured the faint heat signature of engine vents glowing against the cold background. The hull appeared narrow and tall-sided, built for speed, its design optimized for concealment rather than safety. The helicopter banked into position, and the gunner initiated thermal lock. The forward-looking infrared feed sharpened, framing the vessel within a cold, rectangular outline. Within that box, the computer began its calculations: distance, lead, angular velocity, and intercept time. On the weapons panel, icons turned from amber to red. Armament live. Down below, the smugglers reacted. They had seen the shadow cutting through rain and knew what followed. Their deck flared to life in flashes of orange muzzle fire. Tracer rounds tore through the darkness, each streak a burning thread in the storm. Metal pinged off the Viper's landing strut, leaving white sparks cascading down the frame. The aircraft jolted as wind and recoil collided, but the pilot maintained control with practiced, minute corrections. The AH-1Z's chin-mounted M197 cannon came alive, the three barrels spinning at blinding speed. Controlled bursts cut through the rain, the rhythmic stutter of 20mm rounds echoing across the water. The rounds hit the ship's superstructure, punching through improvised armor, severing antenna masts, and scattering debris across the deck. Each impact was a burst of orange light, smothered instantly by sheets of rain. Inside the cockpit, vibrations became language: metal, recoil, turbulence, and the deep bass note of hydraulic pressure feeding the cannon. The storm turned every impact into a flickering strobe, blurring the boundary between sky and sea. Through the optics, the gunner saw men scrambling behind welded plates, ducking for cover, their movements frantic yet organized. This was no panicked crew, it was a team trained for resistance. For a few moments, the engagement stabilized into a brutal exchange. Machine guns from below, autocannon fire from above. The Viper weaved through its own tracer trails, adjusting altitude to avoid predictable patterns. At any moment, a single well-aimed round could pierce the rotor hub or engine bay. It was a knife fight fought through rain, noise, and distance. Non-lethal suppression remained possible, disabling the engines or rudder, but the risks outweighed the gain. The ship's sealed drums and pressurized cargo meant any hit short of destruction could rupture chemicals into the sea, creating environmental and tactical hazards alike. And intelligence from previous operations suggested an escort vessel often shadowed these smuggling runs, ready to recover survivors, cargo, or both. To leave this ship intact would be to invite a second confrontation. Authorization for lethal force came through the chain of command within seconds, but the crew had already understood the necessity. The pilot switched targeting priority to missile engagement mode. The AGM-114L Hellfire's seeker locked onto the heat bloom at the vessel's midsection. The system confirmed tone. A single confirmation light glowed steady. The missile launched in a pulse of fire. For a brief moment, its exhaust illuminated the canopy, turning rain into falling sparks. Then it was gone, accelerating to Mach 1.2, cutting a white line across the darkness. Impact came less than 3 seconds later. The explosion tore the sea open. A shockwave rolled outward in concentric rings, lifting the Viper's airframe for a split second before settling back into hover. The target's hull folded under the blast, its midsection rupturing into flame and steam. Secondary detonations followed as fuel and cargo ignited, painting the rain in bursts of orange and blue. Through the Poseidon's thermal optics, the ship appeared as a white-hot bloom that faded into ash-gray static. The fire spread across the water, fueled by oil and debris. Pieces of the vessel tumbled into the sea. Metal sheets, cargo crates, and fragments of machinery. When the shock subsided, the surface burned quietly. Scattered survivors clung to floating wreckage, their outlines faint in infrared. Among the wreckage drifted sealed containers, some metallic, some polymer-wrapped, and others housing rigid black casings that looked distinctly military. Recovery teams noted antenna mounts and composite shells mixed with the narcotics drums. This was not the debris of a smuggling craft alone. It was the wreckage of a hybrid operation. The Viper held a wide orbit, while RHIB teams deployed. Each craft cut through smoke and floating debris, their lights sweeping across the surface. Bodies, fuel, and crates formed a grim mosaic against the waves. The Poseidon's data link streamed imagery to command, flagging anomalies for forensic recovery. Early readings indicated traces of cocaine base and fentanyl precursors, expected, but alongside them were metallic compounds used in drone battery modules. As the crews marked recovery points, a second signal flickered across the Poseidon's radar. Faint, fast, and deliberate. The operator enhanced the feed and saw the pattern. Short, pulsed emissions alternating between silence and noise. It was not atmospheric interference. It was electronic jamming. The Viper's onboard displays blinked and flickered, telemetry stuttered, frames freezing for seconds at a time. The pilot switched to backup inertial navigation, flying by sight and instinct. Far to the northeast, a silhouette broke from the haze, low in the water, sharp-bowed and running dark. Its speed and trajectory matched an intercept vector. Through the Viper's FLIR feed, the new contact resolved into a long hull with improvised plating and movement on deck. Men shifted beneath tarps, working in disciplined coordination. One raised a tubular launcher and shouldered it into firing posture. The image was unmistakable, a man-portable air defense system. The mission's nature changed instantly. The first ship had been cargo. This one was protection. The smugglers were no longer fugitives. They were combatants. The Viper climbed for altitude, holding a defensive orbit as command assessed. Rescue operations below continued, but the new vessel closed the gap quickly, its jamming distorting communications. The decision was clear, though the process remained procedural. Deny the Escort any chance to recover the cargo or fire on U.S. assets. Lightning flashed across the sea, illuminating both the debris and the approaching hull. The storm had become a battlefield, and the next engagement was seconds away. The Viper steadied its rotors against the gusts, its sensors refocusing on the oncoming target. The pilot's breathing slowed, synchronized with the machine's rhythm. The first vessel still burned in the background, a funeral pyre for one phase of the mission, while another threat advanced through rain and fire to take its place. The interception was complete. The second fight was about to begin. Because the return echo on the long-range screen was not a rescue signal, but an approaching escort, the tactical picture shifted from recovery to confrontation. The Poseidon's operators classified the new contact as hostile and increased sensor resolution accordingly. At 4:30 a.m., the surface around the burning wreck became a flurry of activity. RHIBS threaded between floating wreckage, while Seahawk crews lowered rescue swimmers into oily, smoke-streaked water. Survivors were hauled aboard on inflatable platforms, their gloves and faces stained with diesel and bloodless exhaustion. Floodlights crisscrossed the debris field, exposing sealed containers that bobbed like silent buoys. Initial field tests detected narcotics, but a closer scan revealed additional materials: lithium salts on fragments, fragmented battery casings, and compact transponder housings with evidence of tampering. Technicians noted that the recovered items did not match the profile of a routine smuggling load. While recovery teams worked, Poseidon's sensors detected interference across the tactical grid. The data link between aircraft began to flicker as narrowband bursts masked telemetry. Through the haze, analysts isolated a fast-moving hull cutting through the squall, a converted patrol craft roughly 35 meters long. Its emissions were intermittent and deliberate, consistent with short burst jamming intended to confuse passive receivers. From the Viper's cockpit, the FLIR feed revealed the Escort's silhouette: low, long, and running dark. Figures moved across the deck with practiced efficiency, shifting tarps and setting up improvised shields. One figure hefted a cylindrical object that resolved into the profile of a man-portable air defense system. The gunner logged the visual identification, and the pilot adjusted approach parameters to compensate for the jamming and crosswind. The Escort slowed into the wreck zone and assumed a broadside posture, effectively converting its hull into a firing platform. Men on deck secured mounts and fed belts into heavy guns. The vessel's antenna array continued to pulse intermittent interference, and the mission commander assessed that hostile intent had moved beyond posture to preparation. Inside the Viper, cockpit displays cycled through backup navigation and inertial modes as primary data links degraded. The pilot manually aligned bearings, while the gunner stabilized the thermal zoom with micro adjustments, holding the reticle on the heat bloom of the Escort's engine. Static rose to a continuous hiss in the headsets as the enemy's electronic countermeasures increased in intensity. Every flash of lightning over the water overexposed the deck image for a heartbeat, forcing the crew to rely on muscle memory and drilled procedures rather than steady video. When the Escort established a firing position, its crew began the final motions of an ambush rather than a rescue. The pilot interpreted the movement pattern as an imminent threat and prepared a defensive vector. The gunner reported increased activity on deck and recommended a preemptive engagement to prevent recovery of materiel and to protect aircrews in the area. The decision to engage hinged on timing. Suppress the Escort before it could use the wreck as cover or allow it to reach the material and disappear into the storm. The pilot slotted the Viper into a shallow attack orbit and readied countermeasures. The atmosphere inside the cockpit narrowed to instrument readouts and breath. Outside, the rain blurred the world into motion and noise. The last seconds before action were measured in small flickers on the HUD and the hum of rising rotor load. When the firing posture became unmistakable, authorization came through the comms channel in procedural form, and the Viper moved from observation into attack. The Escort's deck had already become a staging area for weapons. In the space between two lightning flashes, the helicopter leaned into a strike profile, flares were armed, and the crew prepared to turn the storm into a killing field. 4:41 a.m. The Escort came into view like a dark stormbreaker, a low, narrow hull sliding through rain toward the smoking wreckage. On the Viper's HUD, the contact resolved into a tight heat signature and a cluster of moving points on deck, each shift suggesting human activity. The pilot adjusted heading and descent, converting the aircraft's orbit into a probing attack vector, while the gunner held the thermal zoom steady despite turbulence. The Escort's silhouette was clear, roughly 35 meters, reinforced bow, improvised shields along the rails. Short bursts of radio frequency energy jagged the spectrum. Narrowband jamming that chewed at telemetry and caused the data link to stutter. Backup inertial navigation filled the gaps, and the crew reverted to FLIR and practiced geometry. Figures moved on deck with mechanical rhythm. One rose and unfolded a long cylindrical tube into firing posture. The gunner's reticle tracked the motion and flagged the launcher as the highest risk element. The Viper settled into a shallow engagement orbit at 150 to 200 feet, speed trimmed to maintain sensor returns while limiting exposure. Rotor downwash chewed oily spray from below. Cockpit instruments hummed. Flares and chaff were armed, and an AGM-114 stood ready. Visibility remained poor. The sea cluttered with false targets, but the launcher held a clean thermal contrast. Every second the Escort lingered increased the chance of materiel recovery. Every second it moved kept the helicopter in danger. The pilot measured angles and led, weighing distance, interceptor time, and collateral risk. The decision narrowed to one imperative: deny the Escort the wreck, or allow it to carry away both cargo and deniability. The Viper held its knife-edge orbit, seeker tone faint in the headset, ready to act. The battle erupted without warning. Tracer fire ripped through the rain from the Escort's deck, and the Viper replied with controlled bursts from its 20mm cannon. Each flash lit the storm like lightning, the sound a sharp rhythm of metal tearing air. The exchange was vicious but precise. The gunner cut through weapon mounts and the bridge, breaking the enemy's fire pattern before it could stabilize. Bullets struck the helicopter's frame, sparks showering off the landing strut. Yet the Viper held steady. In the blur of rain and recoil, its cannon carved through the dark, igniting fuel lines and setting the deck ablaze. The Escort fought back, launching a shoulder-fired missile that sliced upward, but flares bloomed, drawing it off course before it detonated harmlessly in the sea. Smoke rolled over the deck, silhouettes scrambling for cover. The Viper's bursts grew surgical, suppressing every movement until the Escort's guns fell silent. With the threat weakened but still dangerous, the helicopter shifted position, feeding a new firing solution into its system. The next strike would not be a warning. It would be the end. The storm peaked as the Viper locked onto the Escort's glowing engine. In one controlled motion, the Hellfire launched, a streak of white fire vanishing into rain, followed by a single, crushing blast. The explosion split the vessel apart, shockwaves bending the sea and hurling metal skyward. Secondary detonations turned the Escort into a burning shell, flames devouring the hull until it folded and sank beneath the surface. Smoke merged with rain, the horizon dissolving into gray haze. The Viper hovered through the turbulence, its sensors confirming no remaining heat signatures. Below, survivors drifted among wreckage and oil, the water shimmering with reflected fire. Short cannon bursts kept the debris field isolated, denying any recovery. From above, Poseidon's thermal feed showed the last fragments sinking, and inside them, signatures that didn't belong to narcotics at all. The battle was over, but the evidence left behind hinted at something far larger, a smuggling route carrying not just drugs, but the technology of war. When the smoke thinned, the sea exposed what the missiles had truly uncovered. The wreckage carried no narcotics bales or fuel drums, only sealed metallic canisters, still steaming in the surf. As Navy crews moved in, they realized these were not drug containers at all. Inside were scorched drone batteries, circuit boards, and antenna components, the anatomy of a weapons network disguised as smuggling cargo. The Poseidon's onboard lab confirmed traces of narcotics mixed with lithium, magnesium, and polymer wiring, a combination that made no civilian sense. Within minutes, Command reclassified the site from interdiction to intelligence recovery. Serial codes matched fragments from drone wreckage found months earlier off North Africa, revealing a transoceanic network linking cartels to illicit technology suppliers. Each crate pulled from the sea told the same story: black market engineering hidden inside drug routes. The mission that began as a strike against traffickers had exposed a global pipeline merging criminal finance with military hardware. As dawn broke over the Caribbean, the last container was lifted from the waves, and the Poseidon transmitted its findings to Washington. What the crew saw below no longer looked like contraband. It looked like a warning that the next generation of warfare had already found its smugglers. When the last echoes of gunfire faded, the sea fell back into silence. Smoke drifted across the surface in slow ribbons, merging with the gray horizon as dawn began to rise. The battle was over, but the work had just begun. U.S. Navy recovery teams moved through the debris field with mechanical precision, divers mapping grid points, RHIBS marking drifting fragments, and Seahawks hovering above with magnetic hoists ready to lift whatever the sea still hid. Every motion carried weight. The air smelled of scorched oil and salt, and the water shimmered with a thin rainbow film. EOD specialists in blast suits worked from the edge of the deck, isolating canisters that hissed faintly with chemical heat. Others secured crates blackened by flame, their surfaces blistered from the blast, but still intact enough to show stamped serial codes. Cameras flashed under floodlights, capturing the silent proof of what this battle had revealed. From higher altitude, the Viper circled slowly, its rotors leaving concentric ripples across the calm water. The pilot watched the pattern of movement below. The divers, the hoists, the flickering strobes of recovery markers, and knew instinctively that the mission had evolved beyond an interdiction. They hadn't just stopped smugglers, they'd uncovered a supply chain. Each metallic fragment pulled from the sea told a story of dual-use intent, parts that could build drones, sensors, or precision-guided systems. The Poseidon remained on station, feeding real-time data into encrypted channels. Spectrographic analysis confirmed the earlier suspicions. Chemical signatures from narcotics were layered with residues of lithium and magnesium, materials used in drone power systems. Serial numbers matched previous seizures, traced to front companies operating out of the Gulf and Southeast Asia. Within hours, analysts in Washington would draw the same conclusion the crews already knew. This was not smuggling. It was logistics for a shadow war. By mid-morning, the recovery zone had transformed into a floating laboratory. Containers were sealed, evidence logged, and debris towed clear of the hazard area. The first summary packet transmitted to the Pentagon described not a cartel bust, but a hybrid interdiction event. It marked a new precedent. When organized crime merges with military capability, the response must shift from law enforcement to warfare. The destroyer's loudspeakers fell silent as the final Seahawk ascended, trailing mist from its rotors. Below, the surface of the sea glimmered as if untouched, hiding the wreckage that had burned there only hours earlier. The men aboard didn't celebrate. They stood at the rail and watched the horizon, each one understanding that what they'd fought was only the beginning. When the Viper turned home, its engines broke the morning calm one last time. The ocean below looked peaceful again, but every sailor on scene knew better. Somewhere beyond that horizon, others were still running the same routes, trusting the same storms for cover. They would learn soon enough. The United States was done chasing. From now on, it would strike first. Like and subscribe to Military Power by Radas because power only matters when it's ready to act. See you next time.